past year has been a strange time for all of us. And it can be even harder if you're an expat. 1 in 10 Swiss people lives outside of Switzerland. In this episode of the Swiss Connection, we hear from a few who are living in the United States. They tell us how they're experiencing the coronavirus pandemic and politics in their adopted homeland. I'm Susan Masika. Before the pandemic hit, a colleague and I spent 2 weeks visiting Swiss expats in America. Michele Andina is our music director here on the Swiss Connection. Hi, Michele.
Hi, Susan. I think we should mention that my main job here at Swiss Info is being a video journalist. So on our trip, I was filming video portraits of some really interesting people we met, and we really connected with them.
And this year, we really wanted to find out how they're doing.
You guys hear me okay?
Yeah, very well.
Perfectly. And I also see you perfectly.
That's Adrian Hosley, who's been living in the U.S. for 20 years. He serves as a police officer in South Dakota. There's no working from home for him during the pandemic.
25. I'm already in route 47. Yeah, 271, 30 here.
Drop the gun, man! Drop the gun!
Those were snippets from some calls he responded to. We checked in with him on a video call. And even after a long day and hardly any sleep, he was still happy to chat with us about his work.
Today was one of my part-time jobs that I worked, where I work as a law enforcement agent in our regional airport here in Sioux Falls, where we supplement the TSA agent that work at the airport, where we assist them if they locate something that's illegal, that cannot be brought on a plane. But we also deal with if people get disorderly or irate about whatever the case may be. Maybe they're intoxicated, sitting at the bar for too long before their flight leaves and whatnot.
Adrian is originally from St. Gallen in eastern Switzerland. When he was 20, he and his dad moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Today he lives in the neighboring state of South Dakota.
And because he's a cop, and he used to live in Minneapolis, I couldn't help thinking of the George Floyd case. And I wondered how that might have affected his work.
You've been on the force since 2015. In terms of how you feel that you are regarded in the public, in terms of doing your job, do you still feel appreciated?
Yeah, it's. I want to say here in South Dakota, we have a lot of support from the citizens as far as what we do in our day-to-day job. Occasionally, you deal with somebody that you may have to arrest and take into custody, that somebody's making, some kind of comment that you can't do that, or, brutality, and just take it out of context because, it's the in thing to do. But I also have to say that I think as a large, law enforcement still has a lot of support. The support group just may not be as vocal about their support than those that are against law enforcement or, the current trend.
And when Adrian's not on duty enforcing the law, he wears another uniform. He volunteers as an EMT, or emergency medical technician. This is especially challenging in a pandemic.
You always respond under the assumption that you're going to have contact with somebody that's, infected, especially if we deal with like a respiratory or flu-like symptom response. So we do isolate ourselves. Like if I would respond as a driver, I'm completely sealed off from the compartment where they treat the patient. And then even as a provider that actually assists the patient, you wear full face mask, full gown to protect yourself. Also, if at all possible, we put a mask on the patient itself. Obviously, if we have to do certain interventions, that's not possible, but we do protect ourselves to the best of our ability.
And what's that been like for you? I mean, in terms of your level of comfort or worry about your own health or that of your family?
I have to admit, I have not gone on as many calls as I probably have before, just to kind of minimize the exposure to the virus, to limit, myself as much as possible. So that has, affected me in that way. As far as worry about catching a virus, I kind of work under the assumption that it's not an if, but more of a when I catch it.
While Adrian's work has become more intense, things have slowed down a lot for the musicians we've stayed in touch with.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And then it's like the do, re, mi. So the mi is kind of between me and me. Do, re, mi.
This is jazz singer Gabriela Martina demonstrating an indigenous Swiss musical scale. We featured her on a previous episode of the Swiss Connection. She's lived in Boston for many years. When we met her there, she was teaching at a vibrant music school. But not anymore. Via video chat, she told us how she's been keeping busy instead.
Did you maybe have more time to, I don't know, compose, or for your creativity? Do you think there were also opportunities here?
Absolutely. I'm lucky that I'm studying, so I'm actually finishing up my master's degree at the New England Conservatory of Music, and I've written a lot of music, so I'm already ready to go into the studio again in May. I can't wait, and we all get tested and we play it as safe as possible.
The pandemic forced her to cancel the European tour where she was going to release her previous album, Homage to Gramlis. That's the name of the farm where she grew up in Lucerne. She says the songs she's working on now are inspired by the polarized societies she's experiencing in the US, especially after a year marked by the pandemic, the presidential election, and the Black Lives Matter movement.
I have a feeling it's going to be, some of the tunes might be quite provocative, but that's what it is. I mean, people have to face more uncomfortable conversation because otherwise you never can move forward. If you always think like, I can't talk to this person, that's not a good beginning. You should start like with being more open with listening the other opinion and then try to see like maybe he or she has a point. That is very, very important to consider. Maybe I am wrong.
That was a demo from a new song called Alpha Bird. For Gabriela, not being able to perform for an audience for so long is a financial hardship, but she still considers herself lucky.
I still have my place. I still have food. Really, lots of people are on the street, so that's fact here in the US. And I'm not one of them, so I'm fine. All my musician friends, they have nothing. It's like you can do some live stream, but let's really face it, it's just not the same. And there's just too much competition out there for a live stream concert. Then you have a great movie with all these special effects and amazing camera people, and who knows. Even I would probably prefer a nice movie than a live stream concert. Of course, I support a friend every now and then, but it's just not great.
So while she can physically sing in front of an audience or meet with her co-musicians, Gabriela came up with other ways to stay creative.
Well, what can I do that keeps me and my friends somehow sane? And I started to cook, which was not so new to me because I love cooking anyway. And I just cooked for every day, like dinner, and texted people who are in the neighborhood or somewhere in the world who have a different time zone, but let's share food together online so we can still somehow be connected and listen to each other's concerns and stories, and that kind of kept me alive, I have to say. And I think it somehow maybe even helped some friends and family members to just kind of have somebody to check in on them and stay still connected, even though you cannot see each other really. And I encourage a lot of people to do the same because it's so simple. And if people don't feel comfortable eating in front of the camera, I mean, it's kind of like the same as being in front of each other in a restaurant. I don't see the difference, but you can also just share a drink. You can also just talk.
Good morning.
Hi, Jean.
Hi.
Nice to see
Hi.
you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah.
Good to see you too.
I'm going to put my other earpiece in because I'm getting a lag from.
How are you?
I'm good. How are y'all doing? I'm good.
Yeah,
How are y'all doing?
Good.
Yeah.
Should I go to the
That's Jean and Robert Stickney, who live in New Orleans. Robert's maternal grandmother emigrated to the U.S. from Fribourg in the early 1900s. When we phoned the Stickneys, it was the start of Mardi Gras.
There are quite some similarities between this event in New Orleans and the Basel Fasnacht. Both are traditional carnival events where people like making political satire. While Fasnacht in Switzerland was cancelled due to the pandemic, the people in New Orleans came up with an alternative to their usual parades.
So instead, people have been decorating their houses like Mardi Gras floats.
Normally, the Mardi Gras parades feature so-called floats, big displays that seem to float on trucks and tractors, driving past crowds of revelers. A no-go in a pandemic.
So there's this whole house float thing going on. Some of them are really elaborate. And I thought, there'll be, some people will do it. There's thousands of houses that are decorated like that. So people are driving through the city, to look at all the houses. And some of the ones on St. Charles Avenue, they've had professional artists come and decorate the houses. And there's one that's a dinosaur house that has giant figures in the front yard. And some of them are really artistic. Like there's a parade called Muses. And so they've got this house on St. Charles Avenue that has paintings of the different muses. But anyway, it's beautiful.
But then, as his wife Jean was telling us, there have been some sad changes too. The coronavirus pandemic silenced some of the local musicians forever.
Right at the beginning last year, we lost a slew of old New Orleans musicians. And I think it's probably because Mardi Gras had passed and a lot of them played gigs, because Mardi Gras, it's not just the parades and it's every night there's big shows at clubs, but it was stinging that like every other day you would hear another musician, had passed away. Now, most of them were elderly, but some weren't that old. It affects, Black and brown communities a lot more. It affects, people who don't have quite as much money, a lot of artists and people that don't have good access to healthcare, which is just horrible. It's astounding.
Robert, who's a consultant, has been able to work from home. But Jean had to more or less close her confectionery business to reduce the risk of catching the virus.
And although they canceled their trip to Switzerland, they've been able to strengthen their connection to the local Swiss community. Jean is on the board of the Swiss American Society of New Orleans.
Our annual January meeting is kind of where we re-elect the board, and a very important meeting and party. And we had quite a few people show up for it. It's funny because early on, hardly anybody would join in on a Zoom. But like at the last meeting, we had quite a few people who it was their first time or they called in. But it was fun.
New Year's Eve was fun because we did it at 5:00
it was fun.
In New Orleans. So it was midnight at Switzerland. We did it at, 4:45 so that everybody was able to raise a glass of champagne and toast the new year at the time that it was midnight in Switzerland. And then a bunch of people had to get off the call because they were calling relatives in Switzerland.
We didn't take that into consideration.
But it was fun. And we had a big turnout for that. We probably, for a Zoom call, we had, 20 or 25 people on it.
When we met Robert back in 2019, he had just gotten his Swiss citizenship and was excited about voting. Of the 800,000 Swiss outside of Switzerland, not quite 25% are registered to vote. But Robert really went the extra mile for the general parliamentary elections.
Well, for the big national election, I took too long and then realized that it wasn't going to get there in time. So I went and had it shipped DHL to get there on time. And that ended up being like $40 to vote in the election. But it's like, I wanted to make sure that I got my vote in. That was the first time I voted too. So.
Oh, wow. That's dedication. That's great.
That was worth the $40.
Mm-hmm. Made me feel, okay, I really am a Swiss citizen. I was able to vote.
That does make it real, doesn't it? Yeah.
I really do appreciate, though, the fact that the Swiss send you information about what you're voting on. It's not just a ballot, and that they try and present, if it's a referendum, what the people who are arguing for it are saying and what the people who are arguing against it are saying. It seems quite reasonable and very adult.
Are you a Swiss citizen living abroad? Where do you live? And what's your day-to-day life like these days? We'd love to hear from you. If you found us via social media, just leave a comment. Or you can look us up on our parent website at swissinfo.ch. That's where you'll also find lots of stories about the Swiss abroad community, including videos about some of the many people we've met. And if you ever feel nostalgic, rewind a few episodes for our special series explaining the Swiss origins of nostalgia. This episode was produced by me, Susan Masika, and Michele Andina. Our studio engineer is Danny Wheeler. Hey Michele, this is actually the first time we've worked in the same room in over a year.
It is. I really hope we can soon meet with our work colleagues in real life more often again.
While you're here, let's give our listeners a mini music lesson to help them identify some of the special instruments that you used in our theme music.
Oh gosh. Well, apart from the piano, you can hear an alp horn and an Appenzell dulcimer, which unfortunately I can't play myself, but was able to grab from our archives. And then there's individual music for every episode, which, depending on the topic, we either grab from the archives or I make our own music from objects I find around my place, like the lid of a jar, a kitchen timer, or some toy instruments.
It's very creative. And there's also a very traditional instrument, the clickety-clackety-clefala, which is sort of like Swiss wooden spoons. Well, Michele, I'm looking forward to your next composition. The Swiss Connection is a Swiss Info production. Thanks for listening.
Do you want to polish your knowledge about Swiss elections, referendums and political parties, while at the same time learning more about the quirks of the political system in Switzerland? If that's the case, our newsletter course is just what you need. Each week for a month, we'll send you a free installment explaining the most important details of how Swiss democracy works. Our course teaches you who is eligible to vote in Switzerland, what the different parties stand for, how election and popular vote results are implemented, and what distinguishes Swiss democracy from other political systems. Our crash course is interactive, like democracy itself. Your questions will be answered on an FAQ page, and you can debate with other users and share your inputs and opinions. We will also provide links to multimedia articles and videos to help you better understand the Swiss democratic system. Please join us and sign up for the free Democracy Crash Course newsletter at www.swissinfo.ch/democracy. That's www.swissinfo.ch/democracy.